Here's the stock portfolio tracker you'll be making in Google Sheets. It's clean, crisp, informative, and is very similar to the exact sheet I use to monitor and manage my own investment portfolio. There are some intermediate level formulas, but the tutorial is designed with beginners in mind. All of the formulas are in the video description, both a beginner and more advanced form, so you can copy and paste directly into your spreadsheet. Timestamps are also in the description. So first, we're starting off in our Google Drive, and we're just going to create a new spreadsheet by clicking in the upper left and clicking on Google Sheets. From here, it'll open a new spreadsheet, and you can title it up here. In this case, I'll be calling this the Stock Tracker Dashboard, but you can call it whatever you like. Now, to help plan out the structure of the portfolio, we can actually go down here in the bottom left and double click on this tab Sheet 1 to rename it. This will eventually be our Portfolio Tracker tab. Hitting this plus button in the lower right hand corner will create a new sheet, which I will be renaming to Portfolio Dashboard. From here, we're actually going to go back to the Portfolio Tracker tab by clicking below, and now we'll start putting together our spreadsheet. To make it a bit easier to see, I'm going to increase the zoom on my browser, in this case to 150%. As well as press F11, which will toggle the spreadsheet into full screen mode. You can hit F11 again to toggle back at any time. So in cell B2, I'm going to title this worksheet Live Portfolio Tracker, but you can rename it whatever you'd like. And throughout the video, I may be referring to these tabs as worksheets, but they mean the same thing. Next, I'm going to add today's date with a formula by entering equals today, open and close parentheses. Pressing enter, and this will output the current date. Now we'll start framing the core of our portfolio tracker. I'm going to label this section Portfolio Investments. From here in row 6, we're going to add a significant number of column headings, so I'm going to type those in now, and then we'll walk through each one of them. Okay, we have them typed out now, and again, you don't have to use all of these, and if some of them are not relevant to you and others are relevant to you, you can feel free to add or take out whatever suits your purposes best. In this case, starting in cell B6, I have the rank, which will be the ranking of your portfolio holdings by size or percentage of your portfolio. Symbol is the stock ticker used to identify that security. Name is the actual name of the stock or security you're investing in. Allocation is currently what proportion of the portfolio that specific investment is worth. Cost basis, percentage-wise, is how much as a percent of your initial capital that you invested in that stock or security. Asset class will show the asset class for the investment, for instance like stock, bonds, cash, or gold. Sector for stock investments shows the sector of the economy that the business is operating in. And the subsector is where specifically within that sector the company is operating in. Size will qualitatively describe the size of the company, in this case a large cap, mid cap, or small cap company. Now for market cap in billions in column K, we can't fully see this, so I'm going to extend the column by dragging up in the top. Alternatively, you can auto size the column by double clicking on the blue bar to the right of the top of the column. Market cap in billions simply shows the market capitalization of the company in billions of dollars. Subportfolio is a categorization I use within my portfolio to help subdivide my investments across different strategies or investment themes. This is optional, but it can be helpful if you're running different portfolio strategies within the same investment account or portfolio. The unit basis in dollars is the average cost per share that you paid for all of your shares. Price is simply the current price of the listed security. Resizing column P, the position value is how much that position is worth currently in dollars. And now for columns Q through X, I'm going to click and select column Q and hold and drag across to column X. From there, I'm going to use the auto resizing by double clicking on the bar above column X, which will allow us to see the titles for the rest of the cells. Dividends received in column Q is how much dividends in dollars you've received from that investment. Total amount paid in dollars is the total amount of money you've invested or put into a stock position. Total return is the total gain or loss in dollars on that position. Total return as a percent simply expresses that total return in percentage form. Portfolio return is an optional metric that you can include, but it calculates the return this position had on your entire portfolio. We'll cover this in more detail when we fill out the formula. First buy date is the first time the security entered your portfolio, the last buy date was the last time you bought that security, and the last sell date was the last time you sold any shares in that security. Now with that said, I usually leave final formatting to the end, but in this case, since we'll be working with this for a while, we could clean it up a bit now. I'm going to change the size of the title from 10 to 18 size font and make it bold. In cell B3, I'm going to change our today date formatting by going up in the ribbon and selecting Format, hovering over the second option in the drop-down menu Number, which will produce another drop-down menu in which we'll navigate to the bottom under More Formats, and then click More Date and Time Formats. In this case, you can choose any date format that you prefer, but I generally like this one here that includes the day of the week as well as the full written out date. Select the green button to apply. And unfortunately, the way dates are programmed, they don't automatically roll over to the next cell if it's blank. So what we'll do is we'll select the cells B3 through D3, and then in the ribbon up here, we're going to select Merge Cells. Right next to that in the alignment, we're going to click this drop down and select Left Align. And finally, we're going to change this from 10 to 14 point font. For portfolio investments, we're going to set that to bold as well as size 14 font. And again, this formatting is optional and you can do it however you like yourself. Now for our column headers, I want to apply formatting the same on all of them. So one way you could do this is to select and drag across until you have all of them selected. That's the simplest, most intuitive option. However, there is a more efficient and effective keyboard shortcut option, which I'll share with you now. If you click on or select B6 and then hold down the keys Control-Shift or Command-Shift on Mac, and then click the right arrow key, it will automatically select and highlight all of the column headings. This is actually combining two shortcuts, holding Control and using the arrow keys to navigate, as well as holding Shift, which selects regions that you've been dragging across. By holding both Control and Shift, you're doing both at the same time, which is a very effective and useful keyboard shortcut. Now with all of those selected, I'm going to apply several formats. The first is to bold all of our columns. The next will be to add a border along all of them. And the final change will be to change the fill color. I usually like using gray for column headers, but again, you can use whatever you'd like. Now I'm going to select our columns from X all the way back to column C and double click on the blue line to auto size all those columns. Next, I'm going to highlight which of our column headings will likely be filled out manually. In this case, for these cells, I'm going to change the fill color to a blue, which is what I generally use for manual input cells. In this case, those column headings would be symbol, name, asset class, sector and subsector, sub-portfolio, number of shares, potentially either unit basis or amount paid. It depends on which one you'll be inputting, and we'll work through the formulas for both of them. Dividends received, and then the data on when you bought or last sold the shares. The rest of the column headings will be filling out with formulas. Now there are a couple ways I can copy this formatting down. Again, you can save this step till later, but if you select and drag across all those cells, and then click and hold the square in the bottom right corner of that selection and drag it down, it'll drag down the formatting across those cells. From here, I'm going to fill out some example data in these manual input cells, which will make it a bit easier for us to put together the formulas in the other cells. Again, I'm going to select all of these columns up at the top, and then auto resize them to make it easier to see all of the data. If you're wondering where I got the name, sector, and subsector for each of these investments, these are actually taken directly from Finviz. So if you type in the ticker symbol for any stock you're looking for, Finviz has a categorization and the name for each of these companies. In this case for Google, it's in the communications services sector with the subsector internet content and information. I simply copied those descriptions over manually for each of these investments. Starting off, let's scroll over to market cap. So for the cell K8, this is the formula I'm using for market cap in billions. It's perhaps a little more complicated than it needs to be, but I find that this is a bit more flexible, especially if your portfolio has non-stock investments where the market cap may not be applicable. I won't go over it in too much detail, but effectively what the formula is doing is checking to make sure your investment is a stock, and then it looks up the market cap using the Google Finance function. After that, it then divides that by a billion to get the market cap in billions. If it's not a stock investment or if there's any other error, it simply returns a blank cell. In this case, we now have the market cap in billions. Now, if you want to clean this up a little bit and reduce the number of decimal places, you can simply click decrease decimal places up here in the ribbon until it's at what you like. For me, I usually have no decimal places here. From there, click and hold the blue square in the bottom right-hand corner of the cell and drag it down across the other cells. As you can see, the market capitalization in billions has now been auto-populated for the remaining investments. Next, we'll be taking a look at the price function. For cell 08, this is the function that I'll be using to look up the live price. It simply checks to make sure that the ticker cell for that row is not blank. If it is blank, it will return a blank cell for the price. If the cell is not blank, it'll simply report the live price for that ticker. As before, we can drag this formula down. Now for this, we can select these cells and actually increase the decimal places once and then decrease it to make sure that all of them are showing 2 cents in the decimal places. And I'll actually do the same thing here as well. The position value formula in this case in P8 is relatively straightforward. Again, I'm checking to make sure this row does have a ticker, but if it does, I'm simply multiplying the number of shares times the current live price. This gets us the total position value in dollars. Now, if you prefer simplicity, it's perfectly fine to have the formula without the isBlank check and just have it as the number of shares times the price, though I generally like having this check in place. So let's drag that down. And now actually for all of these dollar value cells, let's reformat them as number. And in this case, we're just going to select the default number here. Now, if you're inputting the unit basis per share, and this is your main input, then you'll be calculating the total amount paid by taking the number of shares times your inputted unit cost basis. Some brokerages, I think Robinhood is one example, that reports your cost basis as a unit cost basis, so this might be the input that you'll be using for that portfolio in that case. So again, if you're using unit cost basis as your input, then these will actually no longer be input cells, and they would be just formulas. On the other hand, let's say that the total amount paid is actually your input in terms of what you'll actually be inputting into the spreadsheet, then in that case, you'll need to calculate the unit cost basis as a formula. That formula is simply this formula here, and the main part of it is the R8 divided by M8, which is the total amount paid divided by the number of shares, which gets you your average cost basis per share. So in this case, if unit cost basis is the formula and your amount paid is the input, you can simply drag this formula down to get your unit cost basis calculated from this formula. Personally, the way I have my portfolio set up, the amount paid is the input, so I'll be continuing to use this as an input cell and unit basis as a formula for the rest of the portfolio. Total return is relatively simple, and for variety, I'll be using the simplified versions of the formula for these cells. So in this case, the total dollar amount return is simply the current position value minus the amount that you've paid. To calculate your total return as a percentage, simply take the total return value in S8 and divide it by the amount paid in R8. This will get you the total return as a percentage in the cell T8. We'll drag that down again, and we'll update the formatting in just a bit. Now for cell U8, the portfolio return percent is a little more complicated, but not too much. It's taking the total return for that specific investment and dividing it by the cost basis for all of your investments. This is calculated a bit more dynamically using a SUMIF function that sums up the cost basis for each individual investment by checking to see that the stock ticker is not blank. So it won't sum up any cost basis unless there's a ticker in this column. And again, we can drag this formula down. Scrolling all the way back to the left, let's now do our allocation percent and cost basis percent formulas. In this case, here's the formula that I'm using for the allocation percent. Again, it's a little more complicated, but most of these formulas I will be putting in the description, so you can simply copy and paste them for all the cases in this row 8 and then drag all of them down, so you don't have to worry about it too much. But basically what it's doing is again checking to make sure that the cell is not blank and has a ticker in it, and checking to make sure that the portfolio position value is not 0. If either of those are the case, it'll return a blank cell. Otherwise, it'll take the portfolio position and divide it by the current value of all the other portfolio positions using this dynamic formula. So with that, we can see that Cigna is roughly 12% of this current portfolio, and we can drag the formula down for the rest. So that was the formula for E8. We'll now do the formula for the cost basis percent for F8. So here's the formula for F8, and you'll notice it's very similar to the one for E8 that we just did for the allocation percent, except in this case, wherever there was a P, we're replacing it with an R. Drag this formula down, and now we have it filled out for all of our investments. In this case, what the cost basis percentage is saying what percentage of your initial investments went into each of these individual stocks. Generally, most of the time, our focus will be on the allocation percentage, but looking at cost basis percentage can be helpful to make sure we're not investing too much of our capital into a single stock. Now looking at cell B8, we'll look at the function for the ranking. Again, this is the formula that I'm using, checking to make sure that the cell is not blank, and if it is not, we'll calculate the rank of the cell based on the allocation percentage. So in this case, the formula is looking at cell E8, which is the allocation percentage for this stock, and comparing it to all the stocks from E6 to E26. Now this is one of the formulas that is not fully dynamic, so if you add more stocks that go beyond this range, you will need to update this, for instance, maybe to E33, so the ranking range updates and can include the additional stocks that you might add later. So that's just one thing to keep in mind with the rank formula. And now we have our rankings. Finally, we'll do the last formula for size, and then we'll clean up the formatting and finish up the portfolio tracker. So before we do the formula for size, we're actually going to create a new sheet. And what I'm going to do is call this sheet Lookup Tables. Occasionally when you're building spreadsheets, you may create a lookup table, which is used off to the side to help with formulas on other sheets. In this case, I've put together a small size lookup table that'll help us to determine what category of size to classify each stock based on their market capitalization. After doing some quick but unnecessary formatting, here's what the table looks like. We'll be using this in the next formula such that companies that have a market cap between 0 and 2 billion will be labeled as small cap companies. Companies between 2 and 10 billion will be labeled as mid cap companies, and so on until companies over $200 billion in market capitalization will be labeled as mega cap companies. So here's the formula that we'll be using to do that, and this is for the formula for cell J8 in the column for size. In this case, we'll be using a VLOOKUP or vertical lookup function, which will look at the cell in K8 or the market cap of the company, and then compare that to the table we just created in the Lookup Tables tab. Over here, it's then looking at this table here in these 8 cells. In this case, for Cigna at a market cap of 74 billion, 74 is greater than 10 but less than 200, so it will be categorized in this row. And then we'll output the second column in that row of that table. In this case, the second column of this row is our large cap category. So that's why we have large cap displayed here. Bringing this formula down, and we now have the size categorization for each of these companies. The reason there's no size for this one is because this is simply an S&P 500 index fund. Okay, now we have most of the portfolio tracker done, so now we're going to do some formatting cleanup to make it look a little more crisp. First off, I'm going to select the cells B2 to D2, and I'm going to merge those as our title cells. I'm going to do the same thing for cells B5 to D5 and merge this portfolio investments subtitle right here. Then I'm going to select column B and I'm going to drag this down since we don't need as much space in our rank column. I'm going to select our rank column cells and I'm going to center them here. Next, I'll select our allocation and cost basis percent. We'll go in the ribbon and format them as a percentage. I'm going to decrease the decimal places by 1. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click and select on the 6th row, so highlight all of that row 6 by clicking on the 6. And what I'm going to do next is go up to the top ribbon, and over here on text wrapping, I'm going to select wrap. So that means, for instance, if I decrease the size of column E, this title will simply wrap around like this. This can allow me to be a little more efficient with space to fit more on a single screen. Continuing along for our shares, I'm going to format these as a number, but I'm going to reduce the decimal places by 2, so it's just whole numbers here. I've condensed the columns N through P to save a little more space on the screen. Same for dividends received and amount paid. If you haven't yet received any dividends from your stocks, you could put 0 or you could leave it blank. It's up to you. Now next, for total return percent and portfolio return percent, let's go ahead and format these as a percentage. I'm going to bring the decimal places down 1 decimal place. And with these percentages selected, we'll do one more formatting on them. Going to format number back down to more formats and more number format. And we'll be using this code up here. In this case, I'll be reducing the decimal places by 1. And using this code allows it to show red whenever there is a negative return. Clicking apply. In this case, we don't have any negative returns, but if there were, they would show up as red. I'm going to now do something similar over here for the total return on this side. Go in format, number, more formats, custom number format. And in this case, I'll be using this custom number format code up here, but I'll be removing the dollar signs. You can keep them if you'd like, but generally I prefer not having them. Click apply. And again, if there's any negative returns, in this case, I'm just going to manually adjust this formula temporarily just to show you what that would look like. It'll show up as a negative return here, And you can see how that flows through the percentage returns as well. And now for all three of these, what we're going to do is do some conditional formatting. So we're going to select all of them and then right click. And then in the menu that comes up, scrolling down to the second from the bottom, we'll click on conditional formatting. Now, conditional formatting will format based on a certain set of conditions as the name applies. So the format rules are here. In this case, we'll do it if it's greater than 0. So in the case of either these values are greater than 0 or in context showing a positive return, we'll have the text show green, similar to how when the returns are negative, they'll show red. So in this case, the default conditional formatting is this green right here, but we're actually going to change that by selecting the fill color and selecting none. However, for the text under the text color, we're going to select that. I like using this green here, and then I'll click done. So given that all of these are positive returns, they are showing up as green. And finally, for these cells here, these numbers might not look like dates, but in reality, these are the actual underlying date values that I pasted in. So we can go ahead and format those, and I will just format them as default dates. Normally, when you're inputting these dates for the first time, they will input as normal dates, so you won't have to deal with this formatting step. Now I'm going to go ahead and select all of these cells and go to border, and we'll add a left and right border. And now our portfolio is coming together quite nicely. I'm going to go ahead and delete row 7 since we don't have any data in it. And now I'm going to select these cells again, and what we're going to do is go up to the top here and click create a filter. Scrolling back to column A, we can now click the filter on the rank column and sort it from A to Z. This will now rank our positions by their current size in the portfolio. You could also rank them, for instance, by your cost basis percentage to see which companies you've invested the most capital in. And if you don't like how the filter squishes the column headings, you can simply resize the headings, or on the other hand, you can remove and add the filter back at any time. And I guess one last thing, I'm going to actually center all of my percentage values over here and over here. Now, one last thing we can do for our portfolio tracker tab is to add a summary at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is select these cells in row 25. I'm going to add a bottom border here, then from cell or column X all the way over to column D in row 26. I'm going to border all of that, and then we're going to make that light gray. In cell D26, we'll label this all investments, and then we'll fill in some formulas for the rest of row 26. For most of these, it'll be the similar formula. You're basically summing up from that column, in this case E6 to E25, and we can simply copy that formula and paste it over, and it'll apply the same to the next column. We'll be formatting these as percents and centering them. Additionally, we can fill out the total cells for cells P through X. In this case, most of them will be this sum formula again. So I will copy that and paste it over from P to column Q, R, S, not column T. That one will have to do a separate formula. And we can do that for column U as well. For column V, what I'm going to do, since this is the first by date column, I'm just going to do the minimum date from all of these. For the last by and last cell, I'm going to do the maximum date from these lists. Copy that formula, paste it over. To fix the right border there, we'll format these cells back as dates. And what we can do for these cells is we'll take this and copy, and then we're going to right click and paste special and paste format only. That'll get us roughly the format we want, and we can simply fix the border and then return the cell gray. As for these cells, I'm going to go ahead and format them as numbers. Now, to get the total return for the entire portfolio, we can't just sum up the individual returns for each investment, but we'll need to take the total return from the portfolio and divide it by the amount that we've paid. If done correctly, these two values should match up and be exactly the same. And this allows you to see and differentiate not only between the return on each investment, but how it's contributed to the return on the total portfolio. So one of the final things I'll be doing for this sheet is in the top left corner above the 1 and to the left of the A, I will click that box and that will select all the cells in the sheet. With that, I'm going to change the font just to be more consistent, as I pasted in some values and data with a different font from the default Arial. Well, so there we go. We now have the full portfolio tracker built from scratch, start to finish, which you should have by following these steps. As a final tweak, you can feel free to remove the grid lines if you'd like, or you can keep them on if you choose. Now, in a future video, we can build out a portfolio dashboard based on this portfolio tracker. However, one thing I can leave you with today is a nice pie chart of your portfolio. Simply select the cells from C6 to E25 and then click Insert and Chart. After that, you should see the chart editor pop up, in which case we can modify this default chart here. Looks like it's already set the symbol as the correct x-axis, so we don't need the name as the label and can simply exit out there. From there, we can change the chart type and scroll down to pie and select the pie chart. I'm going to move the pie chart down here so it's not blocking the way of our beautiful portfolio tracker. And now you have a nice visual chart of the positions in your portfolio. And if you're not a big fan of the primary colors, you can change the format theme for the spreadsheet by going to Format and Theme. And you can select from a list of pre-customized color schemes. And I'm actually a big fan of the simple light theme myself. And this is what I currently am using for my own investment portfolio. Again, this is all just formatting and doesn't change the underlying formulas and function of the portfolio tracker. But hopefully this will give you a nice foundation to build upon either with yourself or with me in the future as we build this out with a portfolio dashboard. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far and appreciate these types of longer detailed tutorials, let me know by leaving a like or a comment on what types of tutorials and things you'd like to see more in depth next. I also have more advanced spreadsheets as well as a quantitative stock valuation model that I have in my private investing platform if that's something that interests you. Obviously, no pressure either way, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.